We are Recyclops. My name is Ryan Smith. I'm a junior studying business strategy, and I'm passionate about startups and recycling. My VP of Growth is Richard Flores, a junior studying econ and business strategy. Richard is passionate about business strategy and making a positive impact on others. I grew up recycling. I came to BYU and recycled, but when I moved into off-campus housing, this opportunity disappeared. I was confused why this was the case, and I wanted to solve this pain. I did some initial research by going to several other local apartments and checking to see if they offered recycling. Next, I looked at the BYU Housing Guide and was disappointed that it didn't contain any recycling statistics. The more apartments I went to, the more I was convinced that this was a problem. Soon I took to calling all of the largest apartments in Provo and found that only one apartment offered recycling, and what they offered was limited. At this point, I was convinced that apartments weren't recycling, but I wasn't convinced that other tenants really cared. I started scouring the internet for surveys and stumbled upon a random sample survey conducted by BYU's Eco-Response Club. This survey showed that 89% of students recycled in their hometowns, and that 85% of students found recycling to be either important or very important. It also showed that 80% of students were willing to pay for recycling. It was great to see that I wasn't alone in experiencing this pain, but I still didn't really understand why apartments weren't recycling and how I could solve this problem. Because of my limited knowledge of the recycling space, I sought to connect with an expert in the industry, and so I reached out to Bill Rudy, the manager of BYU's Recycle Center. I told Bill what I was doing, and he told me that other students had also tried to solve this problem. He walked me through all of their businesses. All of them had failed. I realized that they had also all approached recycling in the same way, a door-to-door approach, and based off this, I assumed that this approach wouldn't work for me either. By this time, I was able to make some simple assumptions as to why recycling wasn't happening at apartments. They had monetary and space restrictions. I set out to find an inexpensive recycling option that didn't take up valuable parking, but wasn't a door-to-door collection approach. It was at this point I got the idea of building a small shed-like structure in which I could hang bulk bags. I made the assumption that I would be able to find space at apartment complexes to put this type of structure without having to sacrifice parking. I asked my brother-in-law to do a professional sketch of the shed design, which I could use to go out with to start making sales. I then designed a pricing structure where I would charge apartments $290 per tenant, which would then be passed directly to the student as part of their utilities. I believe that tenants wouldn't notice such a small increase in their already variable utilities. I then planned on reimbursing apartment complexes 20 to 30% of this fee. This way, apartments could earn slightly more revenue without having to officially charge or change their fixed cost of rent. The first complex I approached was Campus Plaza. I met with the owner and quickly learned that most of my assumptions were dead wrong. I started my pitch, and it was clear that the owner cared nothing about the stats I had obtained from the BYU Eco-Response Club. So I did a fast pivot and abandoned my planned pitch. I told him what I was doing and that I wanted Campus Plaza to get involved. The owner told me that they were not interested in charging the students any more money for anything. I was shocked. The owner cared more about his tenants than he did about making a few extra bucks. I was so confused because I was sure I had devised the perfect payment solution. I also realized that they weren't interested in working with a billing system that operated on a per-head basis. I walked away a little discouraged and without a signed contract, but with a lot to think about. Soon thereafter, I learned that BYU was hosting a landlord conference, and I decided that I should attend. I wasn't technically invited, but I showed up and networked during lunch, making some key contacts, and then at the end of the event, I was given 5 minutes to talk to everyone about recycling. I used some of my newly learned lessons at this event, but for the most part, I was resistant to abandon any of my brilliant ideas. I had several apartment complexes express interest, so I felt like I was on the right track. But after weeks of following up with landlords, all of my leads went dry. The only thing that did come from this event was that BYU changed their housing guide to include whether or not apartments recycle. I could tell that I was doing something wrong, so I fell out of love with my ideas and began to pivot. My first major pivot was to change the pricing structure. I decided that $300 a month per shed was a simple and reasonable price point. At this point, I was in constant communication with the Elms and Alpine Village, and both of these deals felt promising. About a month later, I had no progress, and I gave up on Recyclops altogether. I decided that my brilliant idea was a flop. The next day, I got a call from the Elms saying that they were on board. I immediately called Alpine Village and told them that the Elms had signed up, and Alpine Village decided that they would give it a go as well. The management at these complexes truly valued the idea of being green, and for them, it was worth the cost. At this point, I essentially thought I had made it, and that all the pivoting was over with. As soon as this contract was signed, I bought a truck and partnered with Kong Sheds, a local shed manufacturer. I established the cost structure. There are 2 basic fixed costs, the truck and the sheds, and 2 basic variable costs, labor and gas. Until now, I hadn't reached out to Provo City for help, because I had been told that they were not very sympathetic to this cause. However, I decided that I should meet with Mayor Curtis to at least tell him what I was doing. The day of my meeting with Mayor Curtis, Provo City Council reached out to me and told me they were putting together a brochure listing recycling options for apartment complexes. They asked me all about Recyclops and told me they wanted Recyclops to be a part of this brochure, which would be going out to all apartment complexes in Provo in several months. This once again caused me to realize I was dead wrong about an assumption, so I pivoted, and since then I've worked very closely with Provo City. I was pumped at these new developments. However, I soon realized that my price point was about double that of my competition that would be on the same brochure. In the next few months, I had no luck signing any new contracts, and Alpine Village got a new manager who wasn't willing to spend money for recycling. I was about to lose my contract there, and Provo City's brochure was due to come out soon, so I did something drastic. I cut my price in half. This did the trick. I began reaching out to more complexes, and soon signing contracts wasn't so difficult. My new problem was being able to afford growth rather than being able to make sales. In order to ensure that we have a strong customer relationship, we offer consistent and reliable pickups, and even offer free additional pickups during busy times like tenant checkouts and check-ins. The new price point has stuck, and we've continued to grow, adding a new shed each month, a growth rate that we found to be affordable. With $1,900 in recurring monthly revenue, we have a total of 10 sheds at 6 apartments, servicing nearly 3,000 students. There are currently 35 million Americans living in apartments, and this number is only expected to grow. 52%, or 18 million of these tenants, have no access to recycling. So far, we've had a conversion rate of approximately 60%. At this rate, that brings the total market size to about 11 million people. With an average of $150 per 200 tenants, that's an annual income of $98.3 million. The recycle sheds are working great, and so far, we haven't had to take up any car parking with them. We've continued to pivot and realized that as we grow, we'll find new and innovative ways to change and improve.